Do you find yourself regularly letting yourself down? Do you find yourself trying to implement different self-care practices, but nothing seems to consistently work? It's because you're not looking after the right version of yourself. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about how the phrase self-care has gotten hijacked in today's society and how people are very incorrectly taking action on that phrase. And I'm going to talk to you about what it should actually mean so that you can stop letting yourself down, start getting results in your life, start feeling some peace, and get closer to the best version of yourself. Before we dive in, if you're listening on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit like and subscribe down below. I am so excited about this episode. This is one of the topics that I am most passionate over anything else. I'm really passionate, obviously, about health and fitness, but the topic that we're going to be covering today about how to take care of yourself is probably one of the topics that I am most passionate over anything else. Before we dive into it, I want to make sure that you guys know that we're doing another Fat Loss Forever workshop on March 24th. So in a little under a month, on March 24th on Monday, at 5 p.m. Central Time at nickcarrier.com/workshop is where you can sign up. We're going to be doing another workshop on about nutrition so that you can stop feeling frustrated with where you're currently at. A lot of you guys care more than anything to feel energetic as you go throughout your day. You feel like what is going in your mouth is fueling you and setting yourself up for success for that day energy-wise, but also setting yourself up for success when you're 50, 60, 70, 80, and so that you can feel good and be able to be lively. And so go to nickcarrier.com/workshop, and we're going to be diving into really appropriate education around nutrition so that you can actually start looking and feeling the way you want to look and feel. So March 24th, 5 p.m. Central Time, mark your calendar. Go to nickcarrier.com/workshop to sign up today. Okay, so I have a question for you guys who are listening and watching right now. Think about a time when you've let yourself down. I know, a really positive topic, right? Great start, Nick. I recently asked this question in my virtual 10-week transformation group. At the time that I'm recording this, it was last Monday's call. I asked, and two people shared. And one person started kind of with a high level, letting themselves down. And he had talked about how he was in a season a number of months ago where he was really stressed and anxious at work. The project that they were on was very tough and they didn't really feel like they were getting anywhere. And he was kicking himself because he felt like he wasn't doing as much as he could. And he felt like that stress and anxiety from his career was bleeding into other areas of life. And in particular, in his relationship with his significant other. This was during a period of time in his life when he was actually literally getting ready to get married. And it was kind of like leading into marriage, and after marriage, the stress and anxiety from his career was kind of bleeding into his relationship with a significant other. And he wasn't feeling like he was the best fiance/husband that he could be. And so he felt like he was letting himself down, and he was frustrated by that. And another girl who was on the call in the virtual 10-week transformation went a little bit more shorter, like this past week. She was like, well, I found myself snacking a lot this past week. And she was like, I'm really happy because I feel like over the past year, I've done a really good job of breaking out of the habit of mindless snacking. And I found myself back in that trap of just kind of putting food in my mouth because I'm bored or stressed or whatever it is. And she was like, I'm annoyed that I fell back into that trap. And I share that because the phrase letting yourself down is an interesting phrase, because when we let ourselves down, think about it, we are letting a specific version of ourselves down. When people think about you or yourself, what does that really mean? Because the thing that's really important to understand is you are not just you. You are a community of selves, and the community of selves spans across time, right? Like you are you in the current moment that are listening to this, but there's going to be you in 1 day from now. There's going to be a you in 1 week from now, 1 month, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years from now. So you have a community of selves across time. That's the first kind of area that you have a community of selves, but you also have a community of selves across different areas of your life, right? Like there is a CEO version of Nick in my career. There is a husband Nick in my relationships. There is a brother Nick, a son Nick, so on and so forth. I have all of these different versions of me. And when we say we're letting ourselves down, and we feel like we're letting ourselves down, what we're doing is we're letting a specific version of ourselves down. When she was my client was snacking, let's say, she was not really letting the current version of herself down because she was probably enjoying the snacks and they probably tasted pretty darn good, but she was maybe letting the next day version of herself down or the next week version of herself down because, from a health perspective, maybe her health wasn't as good as if she didn't snack, let's say. And then the client who talked about how the stress and anxiety was bleeding into other areas of life, it's not like he was letting necessarily the career version of himself down. He was letting the husband version of himself down, the fiance version of himself down. He wasn't showing up as the best person that he could be in that area of life. And so it's better to think of yourself as a community of selves. You're a version of you across time. There's some super simple ways that you can think about it on the short term. Like if you are somebody who works out and you lay your clothes out the night before, let's say you have an early morning workout, you're working out at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., whatever it is. Before you go to bed at night, you lay your clothes out the night before. You're doing that for the future version of yourself. You're doing that so the version of you that wakes up tomorrow morning has a little bit less friction to go to the gym, and it's a little bit easier to go to the gym. For me, my wife always laughs at me. I always back into parking spots. And that's because I'm looking after the version of myself that's going to be pulling out of that parking spot. Like backing in is maybe a little bit more difficult sometimes, but it makes it easier on the future version of myself to pull out, if you will. Brushing your teeth. You might not always enjoy brushing your teeth, but you're looking after the future version of yourself so that your teeth are healthy. When you go to high school or you go to college, you might not always enjoy the class and enjoy having to be somewhere at specific times, but you're doing it for the future version of yourself so that in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you can thrive in whatever career it is that you have. So some of these things your current self might not enjoy, but you're doing it for your future self, whether that's the version of you that you're going to be in an hour from now, a day from now, or 10 years from now. And so I think that I started off the episode and the introduction saying how self-care has been hijacked. That phrase has been hijacked in our society today because most people, when they think about self-care practices, if you will, it's simply geared towards comforting the current version of yourself. It's like, take care of yourself, go on a vacation, take care of yourself, sit down and watch Netflix, take care of yourself, sit down and relax. Now, what I would encourage you to evaluate for yourself is if you have been doing some of these commonly regarded self-care practices, like how is that working out for you? How is that working out for you? That might have you feeling good in the moment and comfortable in the moment, but if you continually find yourself running into the same issues, it's obviously not setting yourself up for success. And so how you go about taking action on self-care needs to change. Again, a lot of people might watch shows or movies or Netflix. A lot of people might do mindless snacking or binge eating. Some people go shopping. Some people escape stress by going on vacation. Some people watch porn. Some people drink alcohol. Some people smoke weed. And it's like all of those actions that I just mentioned, let's say, none of them are bad per se, although if you ask me, porn is never good. And I don't smoke, but I don't judge those who do, and the jury is still out on overall health impact. Anyways, those are conversations for definitely a different day. But let's just say, generally speaking, something like watching Netflix or snacking or shopping or, alcohol every now and then, these aren't bad per se, but it's how you actually go about implementing them. Like I watch Netflix with my wife multiple days of the week at night. And it can be good from the standpoint of it's like, okay, it's helping you wind down. It's going to help you go to sleep. That'll help the future version of yourself be energized the next day. And maybe you do need to watch Netflix and rejuvenate and get re-energized. So it's like if you watch Netflix to get re-energized or to wind down or to spend quality time, there's use for it. If you're watching Netflix to escape a particular stressor, let's say, or something that's causing you anxiety, jury's out as to whether or not that's good or not, because it's like, okay, you're escaping it now in the moment, but you're probably still going to have to deal with it in the future. And so you might be better off sucking it up in the moment and figuring out like, okay, what can I actually do to eradicate the stress and anxiety now so that the future version of myself doesn't have to deal with it. So if these things don't hurt the current version of ourselves and don't hurt the future version of ourselves, then they may have a role. But again, you have to think about the purpose of why you're doing it. Is it a self-indulgent behavior that's severely negatively impacting the future version of yourself? If so, I would probably recommend that it's something that you avoid, because you will continually let yourself down, and you'll let yourself down, and you'll let yourself down, and this will cause unnecessary problems and stress in the future. One of the words that I've been really obsessed with and intrigued by over the last couple of years is this word maturity. To me, maturity is something to the extent of sacrificing your current self for something else or for someone else. You know, one of the things, I'm not trying to toot my own horn from this next phrase, I say it with humility. A lot of times people have said to me over the last 9 years, or 7, 8 years after graduating college, people will say, you're wise beyond your years, or you seem older than you are. And a lot of people will say that to other people too. It's not just me, right? But what do you actually mean by that? To me, it's like they are saying that because you're making mature decisions. But what does that actually mean? That means that you're not acting to please simply the current version of yourself. You're acting on behalf of your future self or someone else. You know, somebody who is mature maybe is not going to spend all weekend long drinking alcohol and just partying and having fun with their friends. Because it's like you're indulging the current version of yourself, probably at the expense of the future version of yourself. Somebody who is mature will say no to that final drink. Will say no to that last drink that everybody else is having, because you're thinking of the future version of yourself tomorrow, so you're not going to feel as bad, right? So a mature decision is a decision that is neglecting maybe the comfort or the pleasure or the instant gratification and happiness of the current version of yourself for the sake of something else or someone else. And that someone else might be the future version of yourself. That somebody else might be a friend, a family member. That something else might be a cause or whatnot. You know, I kind of think like generally in the overarching scope of life, how do we mature? How are we forced to make decisions that are, forced is kind of an extreme word. Would want to edit that out. I'm not probably going to, but how do we mature over life? Meaning, how are we put into situations where we don't act simply on behalf of the pleasure of the current version of ourselves, but we're acting on behalf of something else or someone else? You know, when you're young, you don't have any responsibilities for the most part. You know, you go to school, you play sports, you do your extracurricular activities, you do whatever. In college, like same thing. You don't really have that many responsibilities. Once you get out of college, though, then let's say you get a significant other, and then you get a spouse. When you have a significant other and a spouse, you learn pretty quickly that you can't just act on behalf of the current version of yourself. You have to sacrifice a little bit of the current version of yourself for your significant other or for your spouse. And then if you have kids, that is the ultimate, again, not forced maturity. I mean, when I have kids, I'm doing so voluntarily, right? But like when you have kids, oh my gosh, are you going to mature quickly? And if you don't mature quickly, you're going to be in big trouble, or you're not going to be a good parent, etc. But when you have kids, you have to make a lot of sacrifices. You have to sacrifice a lot of the current version of yourself, that pleasantry, the happiness, the doing whatever it is that you want to do for the sake of your children. And so then you are going to mature pretty darn quickly. And so maturity to me is having the ability to not make decisions simply on the behalf of the current version of yourself and that person's happiness and current joy and current pleasure and current instant gratification, but it's to do it for somebody else or something else. And that could be the future version of yourself, or that could be spouse, kids, extended family, clients, what have you. And really what we're talking about is kind of instant gratification versus delayed gratification. But this next part is where it gets really fun. This next part is, I hope, a huge eye-opener for you. I think that the word sacrifice, it sounds all negative. Sacrifice sounds all negative. But to me, that's where we really experience meaning. We experience meaning when we sacrifice the current version of ourselves for the greater good. The greater good could be in service of the future version of yourself, your spouse, your kids, what have you. But when you sacrifice, you actually don't, it's not painful. If you're doing it for someone else or for something else and you know exactly why you're, quote, sacrificing, it's actually super fulfilling. It's actually super meaningful. And so this, let's say, sacrifice of pleasure in the moment doesn't come at the expense, doesn't come with pain. It actually comes with meaning and fulfillment. I think that's one of the things that I want to hammer home to you guys. It's like we think sacrifice is bad and painful. It's like, no, it's actually fulfilling and meaningful. And then the other thing I want to say that, again, is super exciting is what would be most ideal is doing things that actually provide pleasure in the moment, but also set the future version of yourself up for success. So you're not necessarily sacrificing, let's say, the current version of yourself for a future self. It's like what you're doing for your current self is looking after your future self and you're enjoying it in the moment. And so, for example, like if you're making a healthy recipe that's super delicious, you love the food in the moment and your future self is going to be healthier because of it. Let's say you invest in going on a vacation with your wife to improve your relationship, So you love the trip, it was in your budget, whatever that means to you, you have a blast and your relationship is better because of it. So if we can learn how to integrate our behaviors in a manner that suits all versions of ourselves simultaneously, that's when we hit jackpot. That's when we hit gold. You know, it's like a lot of people don't want to work out now to look after the future version of themselves. Because if they work out now, they're not going to enjoy it. They're going to be pain, they're going to be suffering, whatnot. But it's like, what if you find a type of workout that you enjoy? Then it's not suffering per se. It's not a sacrifice per se. You enjoy the actual pursuit of looking after the future version of yourself. That is when you hit jackpot. It's like, okay, what would the future version of myself like to be like, and what can I do now so that I can make the future version of myself be that way and have that level of competence, but I also enjoy whatever I'm doing in the process. Another concept that I think I'm going to kind of wrap up here with today is, I think generally speaking, if you think about the trajectory of your life and looking after your community of selves across time. Again, if you're 20 years old, you might, and let's say you're going to live till 90 years old, which would be awesome. You have 70 more years. You have a lot of versions of yourself in the future to look after. And so it's my belief that at like 20 years old, 90% of your energy, of your decisions should be looking after the future version of yourself, and 10% should be looking after the current version of yourself. And the reality of the situation is most people are too immature, and it's the other way around. Usually when people are 20 years old, they're looking after the current version of themselves almost exclusively. And not until they mature slowly but surely do they start looking after the future version of themselves. Now look, when I was 20 years old, I was in college drinking too much, what have you, and not looking after the future version of myself as much as I should. So I'm not trying to say I have lived this out perfectly, but I really believe that and these are not exact ages and exact percentages, but it's just the philosophy I want you to grasp. When you're 20 years old, when you're super young, you should be looking 90% after the future version of yourself, 10% of the current version of yourself. And then as you go throughout time, that the scales start to move a little bit, right? When you get to the point when you're 80 years old, you know, you might not have that much life left to live. And so maybe just 10% of your decisions should be looking after the future version of yourself, and 90% can be focused on the current version of yourself and making yourself happy and being comfortable and having pleasure and reaping the fruits of your labor that you've put in over the last 70 years or whatnot. So again, I think this is really important to think about our community of selves across time as we lead ourselves, as we take care of ourselves. One of the concepts that allowed me to truly understand this is when I looked at that dynamic of how my parents raised me. And I think that all of us, when we are leading ourselves, we need a balance of looking after the future version of ourselves and the current version of ourselves. And I think parents, the optimal parenting dynamic is when there is a balance of the parents looking after the future version of their kids and the current version of their kids. Making sure the current version of their kids are happy, fulfilled, whatever it is. But it's like when you're a parent looking after your kid, you're trying to set them up for success in life. And oftentimes that means not letting them do certain things or making them do certain things or like encouraging them to do certain things that they might not like in the moment, but it's going to be good for them later on. And so I always say that, again, rough percentages. Let's say my dad was the parent who, when he, cared for me, if you will, he cared 80% of the time for the future version of Nick and 20% of the time for the current version of Nick. And the way I explain this is like, when he walked into the first house that I bought a few years ago, he would be the one who would point out the issues. Like, Nick, look at the roof. Nick, you got to do this to that. And it's like, it might be painful in the moment for me to hear that, and I might roll my eyes, but it's like he's looking after the future version of Nick that doesn't want to have to deal with those problems. And my mom is the one who comes in and is like, oh, Nick, this all looks great. This is amazing, whatever. And she wants me to be happy in the moment. So if my dad was 80-20 future version of myself and current version of myself, my mom's the other way around. 80% current version of myself, 20% future version of myself. And I'm not saying the mom and dad has to play that particular role. I would argue that more common than not, it's going to be the male that challenges their kid to make decisions now for the future version of themselves, and the mom is oftentimes more of the caregiver, but sometimes it can be the complete opposite. Sometimes both parents can be 50-50, and so I would just encourage you, if you're a parent, to think about that concept. I want to come back to the examples that I said at the beginning. Again, the first person who is letting the stress and anxiety bleed into the fiance and husband area of his life. He was letting down the husband version of himself. The girl who was snacking more so than she wanted, let's say, she was letting down the future version of herself. And so if you can think about you and you can think about yourself as a community of selves, as a version of you that will exist across time, and a version of you that exists across areas of your life, then you can start making decisions more clearly so that you're not doing self-care just for the current version of yourself, but you're doing self-care for all the future versions of you and the different areas of life versions of you. And when you do this, to me, that's really what living life right looks like. When you don't let any versions of yourself down, that's when you experience less stress, less problems, and more fulfillment and meaning. And that's really what it looks like to get closer to your best you. Remember, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Feel free to share it with a friend or family member if you feel like you got something from it. Remember, we're doing the Fat Loss Forever workshop again on March 24th at 5 p.m. Central Time. Monday, March 24th. You can sign up today by going to nickcarrier.com/workshop. I want more than anything to be able to serve you in a manner so that you find ways to implement healthy nutrition that you enjoy for the current version of yourself, but sets up the future version of yourself for success as well, so that you can have the type of energy you want to have, you can have the type of longevity that you want to have, and you don't let yourself down. So go to nickcarrier.com/workshop to sign up today for March 24th at 5 p.m. Central Time. I hope today helps you get closer to your health and fitness goals. I hope today helps you look after the current version of yourself and future versions of yourself. And I hope today helps you get closer and closer to your best you.